Well, hello, welcome once again to Pale Blooms and Beyond. Thank you for joining us today. Andy Strickland has had a wide and varied career, from playing in bands like the Loft and The Chesterfields to writing for music publications such as Record Mirror and Sounds to co-founding a football magazine to work as an NHS communicator. Beginning in the early 80s as guitarist vocalist for the band The Living Room, the band soon became The Loft and were active until folding in 1985. Afterwards, Andy formed the Caretaker Race while working as a music journalist part-time. Meanwhile, in 1987, the band The Chesterfields needed a temporary replacement on guitar, and tada, Andy fills in. The Loft reformed in 2006 with original members and started playing some gigs and still play together from time to time. In 2014, Andy, along with Simon Barber of the Chesterfields, played a set of Chesterfield songs as part of the C86 tape celebration. Andy is back with the Chesterfields. The current lineup features Andy, Simon Barber, Helen Stickland, that's not Strickland, and Rob Parry. The band is played live on a pretty regular basis, and as we fast forward to the present, a new album is coming out and a tour scheduled on the back of that release. Well, welcome, Andy.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Good to see you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Oh, sure. And I'm looking forward to this, a little chat. Let's talk about your childhood and upbringing. Where were you hatched?
Yeah, I was hatched not far from where I am now, which is the Isle of Wight, which is a small island off the south coast of England, probably most famous for the festivals that happened down here, 1969 and 1970, when Bob Dylan and Jimi Hendrix played over here, and several 100,000 people descended on our tiny little island to watch them. I was too young, even at my great age. I was far too young to go to those gigs.
Wow. What about your family and upbringing and your parents? Were they musically inclined at all?
Yeah, my mum still is a singer, even though she's 89. She still sings regularly in choirs and on her own as well. She's a soprano singer, and she was always singing and playing the piano when we were kids. And my dad was a big Frank Sinatra fan, so there was always music in the house. We didn't have a record player or anything until us kids became sort of teenagers and demanded that we sort one out. But yeah, my mum was always singing, and my dad was always playing things on the radio and stuff.
Yeah. Let me ask you. Your mom is 89. My mom is 89.
Yeah.
When is your mom's birthday?
May the 23rd.
Is that right? She's just a little bit older. My mom is June the 19th, so just a little bit older than my mom.
Mm.
That's something, yeah. I'm glad your mom is still active in that. That's great. Let's talk about what about your? Can you recall the first single or album that you got?
The first single I got was Telegram Sam by T-Rex, but that was mainly because I stupidly gave my brother some money. He was going into town and he said, and I can't remember which single I wanted him to buy for me, but it wasn't Telegram Sam, much as I loved T-Rex. He was a huge T-Rex fan. And when he came home, he said, they didn't have that, whatever the record was that I'd have asked him for, but I got this. So,
so you don't know if he was telling the truth or
not?
No,
I don't know. And the first album I bought with my own money, I think, was Kimono My House by Sparks.
Oh yeah, good album.
Yeah,
I've always liked the Sparks. Interesting how they moved from California to England and then made it big over there.
Yeah. I watched the film recently. I had no idea that they used to be, you know, college football players, and it just seemed that was just so weird because they didn't seem to fit the image, you know. How on earth did they ever even pick up a ball, let alone run anywhere with it?
That's funny, yeah. You talked about that. What about some of the bands that you liked growing up as a teen?
Well, as a young teen, I was into, well, firstly, the stuff that my brother was playing, so all that glam rock stuff. And I know Brits always say that, but we tend to be of a similar age. So my brother, as I said, was a big T-Rex fan, had all the records. He was a big Slade fan. He had all the records. And then he started buying all the Bowie stuff. So, and I was into that. I wasn't allowed to play his records, but I used to play them when he was out, and I was quite into those. But for my own stuff, I started to go a little bit more down the rock route as a 13, 14-year-old. So I was a big fan of early Status Quo, and I had friends who were into things like Deep Purple and Black Sabbath. So we used to sit around in people's bedrooms listening to all that until punk came along, obviously. And then once we heard the Buzzcocks and the Clash, and we kind of had to make our mind up which way we were going to go. So out went all the old hairy rock records, out went the flared jeans, and we just used to go off. Nobody used to come and play on the island, so we used to have to get a ferry and go over to Portsmouth or Southampton. But all those bands came through. So I saw the Clash 3 or 4 times, the Buzzcocks, the Stranglers, Penetration, all those guys. They all came and played along the South Coast. So we used to go over and see all those. And that's when I started seriously getting into playing.
Okay, well, I want to show you something. See if you recognize this. Whoa.
Yeah, Pauline Murray.
Yeah. Here's the back.
I just loved her voice. That first Penetration album, Moving Targets, was just fantastic. The nearest they came on their tour, they played in Guildford, which is about, once you get over onto the mainland, is about another 50 miles, 60 miles. And we had a friend at school who had a car, so we all bundled into his car and we all bought tickets to go and see Penetration at Guildford Civic Hall. And we got there a bit early and they were sound checking, and we just wandered in. The back door was open and we just sort of wandered in and stood at the back. And when they finished sound checking, we told them where we'd come from, and Rob Blamire, the bass player, he seemed to think it was an incredible journey that you came from overseas to see them. So he took us all down the pub before the gig. So that was a great night. But I just loved her voice.
Yeah. She does have a really distinct voice.
Yeah,
she really does. What about? Do you recall when you were younger a favorite record shop that you used to frequent?
Yeah, we had one. Well, we had 2 record shops in Ryde, which is the town that I grew up in, which is about 4 miles from where I am now. They had a sort of stuffy, old-fashioned record shop called Teague's, which also sold pianos and saxophones and things like that. The record department was stuck at the back, and they had a couple of those old listening booths that you see in old 50s movies and things. But then halfway up the town, this guy opened a groovier, cooler record shop called Studio 4. And he had far more records, and they were, you know, the first time they'd all been out in racks. So every weekend, my friends and I, we used to go down to Studio 4 and dream of having enough money to buy a record, really. And the guy who ran it was well known. If you had a record that jumped, and my friend Chris, who used to buy a lot more records than me, his brother had a really good hi-fi setup, but it was really on the edge, and quite often an album would jump. But whenever we took it back to Studio 4 and said, "Oh, this record's, there's something wrong with it," the guy would just put it straight back in the rack. He would never. He just
resell
sell it to somebody else.
Oh man, okay, that's something.
I had actually, let me show you something.
Yeah, sure.
I remember this foxed me for months. We would walk past the window of Studio 4, and they had this record sleeve in the window, without. They had this record sleeve in the window.
Oh, Slade.
Yeah, and for months I couldn't figure out what was going on this bit here. I didn't know what this was.
Oh, right there. Yeah.
Yeah, and then eventually my brother bought it, and I realised it's Jim Lee leaning over backwards playing the bass.
It is.
That's his head. That's his head.
It is. It is.
But for months I just used to stare at it and think, what on earth is that? But yes, Slade alive.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Isn't that interesting how, some of the cover picks and stuff from lots of albums from over the years, it's like, like you said, I mean, some of them are really so distorted that maybe they meant to do that, I don't know. But
of course, now you'd just Google it, wouldn't you? What's that on the cover of so and so? And you get 5 million responses.
Let's talk about your learning guitar. Did you take lessons, or were you just self-taught?
I started off teaching myself, and my mum, obviously because of her sort of classical background, she said, if you're going to do it properly, you should have lessons. So she arranged for me to go to a woman called Deborah Lee, I think her name was, who was also a singer but a classical guitar teacher in the town. So I used to go down to her house on a Saturday morning, but I really didn't like doing all the, I was practicing to take exams and things, and that didn't really interest me, learning all the, the studies and the scales. It wasn't really what I wanted to do. And this woman had a daughter who was quite severely disabled, and she would often burst into the room in the middle of my lessons, screaming and shouting, and Mrs. Lee had to take her off, and for 10 minutes would go and calm her down and do whatever she needed to do. And while she was doing that, I was always trying to work out how to play the latest T-Rex single or whatever it was, or Bowie or something. And she would come back in and sort of catch me. So eventually she said to me one day that she was finding it a bit tough doing as many students as she had signed up. So she had to let a few go, and I was going to be one of them. So I was absolutely delighted. I didn't have to waste any more time learning scales or Shakespeare's lute music or any of that stuff. And around that time, I also hooked up with my friend Chris, who I met at when we moved to sort of high school. And we basically learned together, and we would sort of push each other. He would say, look what I learned at the weekend, I can do this, and I'd say, oh, how did you do that? What about this? And so, it was very much self-taught, and it was, all by ear, obviously, because, we didn't have YouTube or anything.
Well, I think I've heard this so much about when the punk music, became popular. It was kind of that DIY attitude. It's like, well, anybody could do it. It kind of brought that about. So,
yeah, we were pretty good guitar players by then, to be honest, but we did have to sort of relearn, or we had to try and forget trying to learn to sound like. I mean, my big hero back at that time was Brian Robertson from Thin Lizzy. And I did spend a year trying to play like Thin Lizzy, and then punk broke, and I thought, wow, that's all. Now I need to play like Steve Diggle. Or I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because you look back now and if you listen to Mick Jones playing, you can tell that he was basically a rock guitarist, even though the Clash were obviously a fantastic punk band. A lot of the stuff he did was pretty cool guitar playing. But yeah, I remember definitely thinking, try not to do the rock. Let's try and do something a bit more impactful and a bit more in your face.
Right. Yeah, and a lot of those, like you said, those punk bands, I mean, they were inspired by, old time, rock and roll, So
even if they didn't admit it at the time.
Right. They just put a little different twist on it. What was the Living Room your first band, or were you in another band before that?
No, that was when I got up to London. So before then, while I was still on the Isle of Wight, I think I sent you a picture. I sent you a few pictures during the week. Hope you got them. there was a band called the Confusers. That was my sort of high school punk band.
Okay, gotcha.
And we mostly did cover versions. So we were playing the Buzzcocks and the Skids, the Undertones, the Clash. And we were quite popular on the Isle of Wight. There was quite a good sort of pub band scene down here. And we were the only band that wasn't sort of long hair and playing the Doobie Brothers and, you know, stuff like that. And our big thing was that if one of the bands we loved brought out a single on a Friday or a Saturday, we would learn it and we would play it Saturday night. And that we got a bit of a reputation. It's like, my God, they're playing the new Buzzcock single. It's only been out half a day, you know. So that was my band, the only band I was in down here, Confusers. But I eventually decided I needed to move up to London to get into a band, so the Confusers came to an end.
Well, you guys were you adapted real quickly, like you said, half a day you were learning these songs.
Yeah, we'd get together Saturday lunchtime. Someone would go down to Woolworths and buy the single, and we would sit around the record player and, you know, try and keep lifting the stylus on and off, trying to get the lyrics right. And me and Chris would sit in the corner and learn the chords, and then off we'd go, and we'd play it that night.
I remember those days with cassettes too. You know, trying to hear what the lyrics were, so you'd sit there and rewind, play, rewind, play. You know, constantly this kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't easy if someone was snarling away on the vinyl. You know, it's like, what?
What is?
She did what to a what?
Exactly. Yeah. Well, so you then you formed the living room.
Yeah, I moved to London to get into a band, and I figured the best way to do that would be to go to college, because in those days you got a grant, so you got paid, you know, to go. So I went and found myself a course that I could get onto, and I went to what was then the Polytechnic of Central London. And the very first person I met on the very first day I arrived in London was Bill Prince, who ended up in the living room in the loft. And he was carrying a bass guitar up the stairs of we were in the same hall of residence, you know, like student dorm thing. And for about half an hour, Bill and I were the only two people there. So I realized that he had, you know, I said, "Oh, what you got in that guitar case?" And he said, "Oh, I'm a bass player. It's a Fender Precision, you know." "Oh, right, okay." And we were sort of we've been mates ever since. So that was quite a good accidental meeting. So Bill and I played a bit together. We went to see a gig one night because we thought a friend of mine was playing at it, and he wasn't. But Pete Astor's band were playing, and we thought Pete was good. He definitely had something about him, although we weren't so keen on the band. So we kind of got together with Pete, although he tried to sort of tell us he wasn't interested, but in the end he got interested, and we formed the living room. So we were the living room until we wanted to play Alan McGee's club, which was also called the living room. And he said, "You can't play at the club if you've got the same name, you'll have to change it." So we changed it to the Loft.
And there was no coincidence at all.
No.
You did not know.
No design to it, no.
Right. Yeah. Who came up with the name The Living Room for your band?
I don't remember, to be honest. I think it might well have been Pete. Because when Bill and I were just messing around beforehand, we had some weird, I think we were called something like Dead Men Don't Ski or something ridiculous. Yeah, this was like 1981, you know, some stupid name. So I think Pete probably came along and said, "That's pretty bad. Let's just call ourselves The Living Room." And then when Alan told us we had to change our name, I think it was Bill's sister who was staying with us for the weekend, and she said something about, "Oh, well, if you're playing gigs, you're obviously going up in the world, so you should go up in the house, and why not call yourselves The Loft?" And we thought, right, yeah, why not, you know?
Well, you guys didn't realize that you were interior designers at that.
No. If we'd stayed, you know, maybe if we'd stayed together longer, we would have been the extension or something. I don't know. The ensuite.
As long as you weren't the basement.
Well, funny enough, a friend of mine over here is in a band called The Lovely Basement. We're playing with them in a few weeks.
Okay. All right. Well, you mentioned at the Polytechnic Institute, did you take any journalism classes or major in that?
No, I could have done, but I wasn't really interested in being a journalist. So they had a really good sort of TV and video course. So Bill and I and our good friend Danny Kelly was also there. We all did the TV and the video bit. We weren't really interested. We thought the journalism bit was a bit dry and dusty, and we weren't terribly interested. Funny enough, and of course, all three of us ended up being journalists. But no, we did things like we wrote plays, and the Polytechnic is now called the University of Westminster. It had its own TV studio, and it was really well equipped. So we wrote plays and put on plays, and we did Danny and Bill and I did a really early sort of football program where we gave the program back to the fans and all that sort of stuff. So we didn't have any idea that we wanted to be or we were going to be journalists. No.
Funny how those things work out.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of the band, the original drummer, Andy Knott, he just up and disappeared one day.
Yeah.
What happened?
I don't know. We rehearsed one week, and he I think he said he was going away for a bit or going to Hong Kong or something, and we didn't really believe him because he used to say mad things all the time. And then he just wasn't there anymore, and we did try and find him for a while, but there was no sign of him. So I think I don't know what happened to him. Pete thinks he might have seen him living rough a few years later in London, but quite what happened to him, I'm not sure. But obviously that, we needed he was quite a good drummer, but he was no Dave Morgan. So fortunately, Pete already knew Dave, so that was quite good.
Yeah, so that kind of worked out that Dave entered the fold there. So Alan McGee, he must have liked you guys because he invited you to play several gigs there.
Yeah, we were we went to the first night of the Living Room Club. Somebody, I think Dave Morgan was playing there with another band, and he said, "Oh, there's this guy's just opened up this." We call it a club, and it's very famous now, the Living Room. But it was just a tiny room above a pub in the middle of London. Lots of the pubs in those days had these. You could hire the room upstairs, and they were typically used for sort of folk clubs and poetry nights and things like that. Very small. And Alan had come down from Glasgow, and he just started putting a couple of bands on. It was usually like the TV personalities or people like that. And we went along to the first one, and then we just sort of kind of went. I think it was like every month, and we sort of went every month and got to know him. And eventually we plucked up courage to say, "Oh, yeah, we've got a band. Would you be interested in hearing a tape?" And he said, yeah, all right. So the next time we went down, we gave him a tape. And then he was talking to Pete the following month. And Pete came over and he said, "I think Alan's offered us a gig here." And we said, what do you mean you think? And he said, "Well, I couldn't really understand a word he said, but I think that's what he said." So we said, "Well, you'll have to go back and check."
Confirm that.
Yeah, so Alan's accent was even stronger back in those days. So it was quite, to our ears, it was like, was that a gig or was he shouting at us? I don't know.
Well, that's interesting. Any memorable gigs there that you played at the Living Room?
Yeah, we played in June 1984. We were supported. It was the Jesus and Mary Chain's first gig.
Okay.
They came down on the coach, and I think Micro Disney were headlining actually, and we were in the middle, and the Mary Chain were on first. And Alan was very excited kept telling everyone, "You've got, oh, these guys are great," And about 3 of us were in the room for the sound check, which was just feedback. That's all it was, you know.
Right.
And I just said to Alan, you know, this is mad. You know, you can't. They're not really even a band. It's just turn everything up so loud it all feeds back. And he said, no, it's great, it's great. And he was right, obviously, and I was wrong.
Yeah, well, over the years they toned that feedback down quite a bit. And,
yeah, but they were odd. They were tiny, little, skinny. You know, they looked like aliens. You know, landing in London in 1984. At the living room, there was a sort of aesthetic. Everyone had a certain, you know, everyone wore the same shoes and dressed in a certain way, and they were completely alien to that. So yeah, but obviously it worked. So
it did. Well, at that gig, did they play backwards? Did they turn around with their backs to the audience? Do you remember?
Yeah, I think they did. Yeah, I think it was fairly short and sweet and very noisy. And I wouldn't have stayed in the room for that long because I wouldn't want my ears to have got shredded. Because these, like I said, these are very small rooms.
Right.
So if you were just going to turn everything up and it just go whistle at you for 15 minutes, your ears would be shot when you went to play yourself. So I didn't stay there.
Stay there that long.
I think it was me, Danny Kelly, Bill Prince, and Alan McGee, and that was about it. Standing in there, just watching it.
Well, before moving on to the Loft, who put together your the demos, the rough demos, the living room?
They would have just been recorded by people who just turned up with little. There was a big thing in London around then that people would record gigs. They would just turn up and stand there with a little ghetto blaster or something and just record it. And then the following week, you could usually buy them at Camden Lock in London. There was a big sort of bootleg section of a guy who was a friend of ours, actually, Adam King. He used to run a big record stall on the market, and he had hundreds of bootlegs.
Okay.
And people would just go up and sell him a cassette, you know. So when we were trying to find some of this stuff to use ourselves, we put out a call on social media, and quite a few people came to us and said, "Oh, have you got this one? You know, this is a good one. This is you playing the Clarendon Ballroom." And you know, we didn't have any of this stuff. So we've had fans sort of send us a few, and some of them are good enough that we've been able to master them and use them.
Yeah. Well, one song in particular, I think had potential. A Leaf Falls from a Tree.
Oh yeah, that's nice. Yeah. That was. I think you can tell that we were a bit obsessed with Orange Juice for a little while. We were, you know, it's those sort of guitars. We were definitely, that was the sort of sound we were after. Yeah. But yeah, that's a good tune.
Yeah, that kind of postcard.
Yeah.
Yeah, they inspired a lot of bands for sure.
They even inspired us the way we plugged our guitars in. I met Edwin a few years later when I was working at Record Mirror, and I was telling him about what an influence he'd been, and I said, you know, the fact that you guys didn't put your guitar leads through your guitar strap like all the old rock guitarists did, and you know, you just plugged it in, and occasionally you'd step on it and it would come out. And he said, "Oh, we didn't even know we did that," you know. So I love that sort of stuff where you study someone and you think that's really affected, and they've seriously thought about that jacket or whatever, and then if you get lucky enough to meet them, mention it, and they go, "I don't know what you're talking about," you know. Right. That was my sister's jacket. I just picked it up off the, you know, stuff like that.
Right. That's interesting. Yeah. 1984's White as the Rain was one of Creation's first releases, right?
Yeah, first. I think it's 2009, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And what was the band's reaction to that song?
We knew it was the obvious song in our set to do as a single. And when we I remember we played it at the living room one week, and before we went, we said, Alan's going to love this one. It was, you know, it's so obvious. And as soon as the gig was over, he came up to us and said, "Do you want to do a single? That's the single." So we were right on that. So we figured, well, if it's that obvious, you know, maybe it will do all right. So that was the first thing we recorded properly. for the princely sum of £102.
Is that right?
Yeah.
What was it like? What was it like at your first foray into the recording studio? What was that experience?
It was interesting. We had Joe Foster producing, which wasn't great. It was all right, but it wasn't great. We realised that the studio, you know, it was very budget. Everything was very budget. Pete wasn't feeling very well, and that didn't help. I think he had shingles, so he wasn't particularly well. And we were there for one day. We did 4 tracks, I think. And yeah, we got it out. I remember when the test pressings arrived, playing it and thinking it's a little bit thin and a little bit small sounding. But we sent one off to John Peel because that was obligatory. I sent one to Janice Long, who was also Radio 1 DJ, who was on in the evening before John Peel. And she rang me up the next day and said, "This is fantastic. I love this. Who are you guys?" Well, you know, blah, blah, blah. And she played it. I think it's in the booklet of that CD compilation we put out last year. I think she played it 19 times or something in about 6 weeks. So that's when it all sort of took off, really. It was all down to Janice playing it on the radio.
Isn't that something? Wouldn't it be great if you get royalties for every time they played the song on radio?
Yeah.
Well, what was what are the critics? What did they say about it?
They the ones it didn't get reviewed. Well, it got reviewed, and some people really liked it. But I think nobody raved about it. But when it started selling quite well, you know, Alan repressed it, which was, I don't think that had happened before for a Creation single. So we knew it was doing okay. Janice kept playing it, and then she got us on TV. So a few months after it came out, we were on TV. But by then we'd recorded our next single. This is what we were like at the time. I remember taking a phone call from the TV producer. None of the Creation bands had ever been on the radio. None of them had ever done a session on the radio, you know, where they get you in and you record in the BBC and they play it. So we were the first to do that. And then they rang me up and said, Janice wants you to come onto this TV show and play. So we thought, you know, you should come on and you could play Wide as the Rain. But by then we'd just finished recording our next single, Up There and Down the Slope. And I said, well, we don't want to do Wide as the Rain. We're not going to do that. And they were like, pardon? You know. And I said, no, we'll come on and do our new single, because that will be out by the time this gets shown. And so they said, oh, well, we need to check that. So we could have lost our slot, but to me it just seemed the natural thing to do. You'd go on and play your new record, you know. So fortunately, Janice loved the new record just as much, so we got the thumbs up, and we went and played that. So yeah, I mean, we didn't we certainly weren't the critics' favourites while we were going. We seemed to get more interest and more plaudits after we'd split up, to be honest.
Funny how things like that happen. Right?
Yeah.
Another song wasn't a hit, you know, single, but Rickety Frame. I like Dave's drum beat in that.
That's great.
Yeah. Very, very different. Yeah.
Well, we finally, I don't know if you've heard it, but back when we got back together in 2006, we put that on the B side of Model Village.
Okay.
Single that we did. We re-recorded it with a bit more beefed up and a bit more strokesy sort of guitar playing, and but yeah, always really loved playing that one. And the lyrics are great as well.
Yes,
all about, you know, getting old and, well, they're seemingly about getting old and frail. I'm speaking for Pete now, because obviously Pete wrote all the songs. So, but I'm talking about his body as a rickety frame. I thought was quite a nice image.
Yes. Okay, so let's go to the infamous Colorfield tour. If you want to, would you like to talk about the tour up to the last show, or do you want to talk about the last show as well? Or
yeah, so we got the tour because that TV show that I mentioned, we had to go up to Manchester to do that, and our friend Danny Kelly came with us, and the next day he went to watch a football match, Manchester City, And he ended up sitting next to a guy called Pete Hadfield, who was the Terry Hall's manager, Terry Hall from the Specials and the Calicut. And he basically said to Danny, "Oh, what are you doing up here?" Danny said, "Well, I came up with this band yesterday, the Loft." And he said, "Oh, I saw that on TV last night. Do you know them?" And Danny said, "Yeah, they're my mates." And he said, "Do you think they'd be interested in coming on our tour? We need a support." So Pete Hadfield rang me, and he said, "Met Danny, like you to come and play. We thought you were great on TV, and we'll give you 100 quid a night." Well, in those days, amongst the sort of indie fraternity that we were part of, all the talk was that if you were lucky enough to get asked to go and tour with a proper band, you would have to pay to get on the tour. So the fact that we were actually getting paid 100 quid a night was quite something. Although obviously it didn't pay for hotels and travel and all that, but it was better than nothing. So we got on the tour. Tour started off really well. We played St Austell Coliseum, which was probably the biggest place we'd even ever walked in, let alone played in. And so we went from playing these tiny little pubs in London to playing like proper big venues. We didn't have a sound man, we didn't have a roadie, we didn't have a driver, we didn't have a manager. It was just the four of us. That's all it was. We had no infrastructure around us at all. And the first night of the tour, we got an encore, and we played an encore. And when we came off, Pete Hadfield, Terry Hall's manager, said, "Who told you could play an encore?" And we said, "Well, no one, they were shouting for more." So we went and played another, and he said, "Right." And he came in the dressing room, and our entire rider for the gig was 8 small cans of beer, little ones about that big. And he picked up 4 of them, and he said, "I'm fining you half your rider." And he walked off with 4 cans of beer, so we had 1 each. I think he was probably joking, but it seemed serious at the time.
Right.
And then we played about another half dozen gigs with them, and they were going really well. We were going down really well. And then the day before we got to play the Hammersmith Palais, which we'd all been thinking, this is going to be a good one, 3,000 people. It was live on the radio. The day before, completely out of the blue, I got a phone call from Bill, and he said, "Pete's splitting the band up." And he says, "We don't have to play the Hammersmith Palais if we don't want to." And really? I was completely shocked. And I said,
that was bad time. That was really bad timing right there.
It was bizarre. And I said, "Well, bollocks, we're going to play the Palais. We've got to do that." So we did play the Palais, and Bill said that somebody told him he'd never seen people in the same band standing as far apart on the stage as we were that night. He said it was quite extraordinary.
Wow. So
and we played. We played most of the gig, and then in the middle of Up the Hill and Down the Slope, Pete said something about these guys haven't got a clue or something, and he walked off, and that was it. And then we didn't talk to each other for 25 years.
Wow. Just walk off the stage. Was the crowd just mouth dropped?
Yeah, they thought it was great. It was like, "Oh, in the middle of Up the Hill and Down the Slope, the guy throws his guitar down, storms off the stage, the other guys thrash away." I've got a recording of it. It's the only recording that we've never used. I've got the whole gig.
They just like,
and it is extraordinary.
I would love to see that.
Yeah.
Wow. All right, so you guys kind of had to think about going different directions then. I know Peter and Dave formed the Weather Prophets.
Yeah.
And then Bill Prince formed the Wishing Stones.
Yeah.
I like their song Beat Girl.
Yeah, that was their first single.
Yeah, I got that on the compilation, but a really simple song, but a nice song. All right, you started working for music publications at that point, right?
Yeah, just before that, because I started working for Record Mirror in '84, but just as a freelancer.
Right. You in '86, working for Record Mirror, you helped compile artists for various artist compilation, Fruitcakes and Furry Collars.
Yeah.
Now, what's the meaning there? What is?
I can't remember really. It was me and Nancy Culp did it. I did one side, and Jill was her real name. She did the other side, and I think we just wanted a fun title for it. And I think I can't remember whose collection of artists was supposed to be the Fruitcakes and who was supposed to be the Furry Collars, but that was just the sort of catch-all name we decided to use. I think we had Pulp on there, and Edwin Collins, and
Edwin Collins, yeah.
Yeah, those would have been mine.
Yep. And
she had, did she have Soft Cell or something? I can't remember now.
And you also had Hit Parade.
Right, yeah. Julian Henry, yeah.
Yeah. Their song "You Were Mine" is you remember that one?
Yeah, they had some great songs.
Oh yeah, really nice. One that I like. And then at '87, you interviewed the Cult for Record Mirror.
Yeah, I went to Norway to do that. Yeah.
How were the members? How were the Cult during that?
They were good. They were really good. We went to where was it? I think Copenhagen or something. I can't remember now. And we saw them play at some festival, and then in the evening, back at the hotel, the record company put on some reception, and they had back line up, and they asked the band to play. And I remember Billy Duffy saying that he couldn't play because he didn't have a plectrum. I think he was just trying to get out of doing it. So I put my hand in my pocket and I said, there you go, Bill, you can borrow one of mine. And I remember they did the Final Countdown by Europe. You know that awful they did that. That was quite funny. A few years after that, I was running a sort of celebrity football team at a festival in England, and Ian Astbury was supposed to be playing for my team because he was quite a good football player, or soccer player, as you Americans would call it. And he turned up on the day of the game, and he was really badly hungover. And so I dropped him. I said, "You can't play. You know, not in that sort of state. We had some serious players playing for us." And I said, "Ian, you can't play." And he's like, no, I won't let you down. I said, "No, sorry, you know." And he ended up playing for Loaded magazine instead, because it sort of fitted their sort of laddish take on things. So yeah, I dropped him. Yeah, he wasn't very happy.
I imagine not. Well, he and Billy are what, in LA now? Is that right?
Oh, right.
I think they're. Well, speaking of football, talk a little bit about 90 Minutes.
Well, I was always, and I still am, a big football fan and player. I've only just retired at my grand age. I've just retired this summer from playing for my village team down here on the Isle of Wight. The rest of them are all about 21, 22. So it was time that I packed it in. So football's been, quite important all through my life, really. My dad was a good footballer. And when I was at Record Mirror, I met my now ex-wife, Eleanor. She was the editor, or the deputy editor for a while. And when Record Mirror finished, she went off and started working on what at the time was a football fanzine, really. It was quite a small scale thing. And that was 90 Minutes. And it was run in a tiny office off of Oxford Street in London. Mm-hmm. And they got some backing from Dennis Publishing, Felix Dennis, who's part of the famous Oz trials and all that sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. And they expanded, and they wanted a few more people to come and write. So obviously, me being there, my wife at the time said, "Do you want to come and write some stuff for the magazine? We need some more writers." So I said, "Yeah, that sounds good. Different sort of world to enter into." So that's how I became a football writer, and we had great fun. That magazine was quite irreverent, as you may know, and we used to upset people. But it kind of fit the time. It was the time when supporters over here were getting into, well, if there was a bit of a sort of music and football crossover, And the musicians, a lot of the musicians were talking about teams they supported, and they were always much happier to talk to 90 Minutes magazine than they were to talk to things like the NME, you know.
Oh yeah.
Because we asked them different things. We weren't interested in the new single or the new album. We wanted to know how many times they'd been to Sheffield United or who their favourite player was at Middlesbrough, you know. So that was good fun.
Yeah, one band that comes to mind is Wedding Present.
Yeah. They were from Leeds, aren't they? Or aren't they? They're still going, aren't they? Yeah. And that obviously had George Best on the cover of their.
There you go.
Record. But I remember I went to Wembley Arena, or it might even have been Wembley Stadium, and to interview Joe Elliott from Def Leppard about his love of Sheffield United. And there were about 10 journalists waiting in this sort of backstage area, very serious and heavy hitting music writers. And eventually the band turned up and the PR came over and she said, "Oh, Andy, do you want to come in first?" And somebody said, what the hell, you know, we've been waiting hours, you know. I'm from the Rolling Stone or whatever, I can't remember what it was, but you know, people were a bit annoyed. And when I went in the trailer, I said to Joe, "Are you sure you want to do me first?" And he's like, "Oh, I'm so sick of, I know exactly what they're all going to talk about. I'd much rather sit here and talk about my team, you know." So sometimes it worked quite well.
Great. Well, let's switch gears a little bit and moving back to music. You formed the Caretaker Race. What year was that?
We probably got together properly in about 86, 87. I think our first single came out in 87. So we were probably together in 86, the year after the Loft split.
Okay, and that was named after a Star Trek paperback issue. What were who were the Caretaker Race?
Do you know, I've never read it. We got to a stage where we had the band together and we were rehearsing and we got offered a first gig, and we weren't really ready and we didn't have a name. So we sat in the pub and people came up with these awful names. I mean, I think the Caretaker Race is a pretty terrible name, but the ones that we discarded were shockingly bad, but we needed to give them something to put on the poster. So at the end of the night, the least bad name we had was the Caretaker Race. And I think Dave, the drummer, Dave Mew, he was a bit of a Star Trek fan, and I think he had a book or a comic or something. So he came up with that one. So that's all Dave's fault.
Well, you know what's interesting is I had always, up until doing this research, thought it was like Caretaker Race, like a race, you know, car race, or you know that. Not a group of, you know, of people, or you know.
Yeah, no, they were looking after a planet for somebody.
Right. Right. Interesting. Well, what the members that you recruited, what kind of musical influences did they bring to the Caretaker Race?
Well, Dave Mew, the drummer, he was quite a heavy drummer. He still is. He was a bit of a sort of rock drummer, really. But the reason I got the people in that I got in was because they all lived within sort of 3 streets of where I lived in East London. So I knew them all from Sally, who played the keyboard, Sally Ward. She ran a fanzine at the time called Trout Fishing in Leytonstone, and which you couldn't do. There weren't any trout in Leytonstone. That was the name of the fanzine, and she looked great, and she was good fun. So, and she could play the piano. So I said, you know, would you be interested in playing a Korg organ? And she's like, yeah, I'll give it a go. You know, so we got Sally in. She'd never been in a band before, but she loved all that Orange Juice, go-betweens, and you know, all that sort of stuff. And Henry, the bass player, I'm not sure who his influences were, but he was a fantastic bass player. He didn't know it, but he was a fantastic bass player, Henry. He was a real natural, really melodic sort of bass player. And yeah, so they were quite a diverse crew to get in, but as I say, they all lived very near to me, and we all knew each other from the pub, so it seemed like an easy thing to do.
Well, yeah, you mentioned the go-betweens. Your sound has been compared to them. I can hear that on certain tracks.
Yeah.
Specifically the female background vocals, and some of the arrangements.
Yeah, they were a big influence. I mean, I still love the Go-Betweens, and Bill, Pete, and I. We all loved the Go-Betweens, and we used to go and see them. And the Go-Betweens used to come and see us.
Right.
And I definitely found that when I was writing for the Caretaker, because I wrote the songs for the Caretaker Race, I definitely sometimes had to stop myself and think, this is a bit too Grant McLennan.
Right.
Or sometimes I'd think, oh, that's okay. I should be so lucky, really, that it sounded like Grant McLennan, but
Yeah, some of your vocals do sound like him, but then others on other songs don't so much.
Yeah.
Also, I think that you guys were a little heavier on some songs in the Go-Betweens.
Oh, definitely, yeah. Particularly when we did the album with Stephen Street. There's some pretty heavy sounds on that album.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'd like to mention some of your singles in my comments, and then I'd like to hear your feedback, what you thought. 1987's "Somewhere on Sea," a really nice song. I like the acoustic guitar lead on that one.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, thanks. Yeah, we used a bit. I was listening recently. I had listened to a few of the old. I hadn't listened to them for years, and I'd kind of forgotten that I played quite a lot of acoustic guitar on things, and I like that little lick on "Summer on Sea." I played at a little charity gig on the island in January for a guy I knew who died, for his family, and he really liked that song. So I went back and learnt it again and played it at that gig. And I thought, oh, yeah, it's a very simple little song, but it was quite nice. Yeah, that was the first thing we did. Yeah,
first thing. And then on "Anywhere But Home" from '88, that's a really good track. I like the line, "You drove me insane, you drove me anywhere but home."
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a nice.
Yeah, that's I'm still playing that now, that song. It seems to be one that follows me around. So in the Chesterfields gigs that we've done up to now, we've put that in the set. We've played it because the Chesterfields, all the other guys in the Chesterfields really like it. And it gives them a chance to relax, and it's quite an easy song to play, I guess. And yeah, that's a good tune. That and my sons really like that as well. They think that's my best song. So.
Okay, well, they have good taste,
Yeah.
right? I also like "Fire in the Hold" and "Man Overboard." Man Overboard, I really like the guitar. Excuse me, the guitar on that one.
Yeah, thanks. That's yeah, that was the that gets a little bit angrier, the guitar on that one. But "Fire in the Hold" I quite like just because of the rhythm. It's a bit of an unusual rhythm, and there's also I played quite a nice acoustic guitar solo on it, on one of the versions of it anyway, which took some working out. I seem to remember. Recorded that with John Parrish, who's just mixed the new Chesterfields record. So yeah, that's good.
Yep. And then in '87, you joined the Chesterfields as a temporary replacement. How did that come about?
Well, the Chesterfields were big Loft fans, and we got to know them when we played down in Bristol. They came to the gig, and we sort of struck up quite a friendship, and they would write to us and we would write back. And I think the week after we split up, we were supposed to play with the Chesterfields down in Somerset, down in the West Country, which obviously didn't happen. But I was quite friendly with them, and they had lost a guitar player. And as I believe, the story I've been told is that Dave, who was the singer and lead guitarist, said to Simon, the bass player, who's still in the Chesterfields, Simon said to Dave, why don't we ask Andy from the Loft? They've split up. And Simon said, there's no chance that Andy's going to want to play with us and come down here from London and do this. So Dave said, well, you could ask him. So Simon said, all right, I'll ask him. And so when they rang me, I thought, well, I don't know if I want to do that. It's very nice to be asked. And then Simon said, well, we've got these gigs coming up. The first one's Glastonbury Festival. And I thought, oh, okay, that's interesting. Then the next night we're playing an Oxford College ball supporting Desmond Dekker. And I thought, oh, yeah, that sounds good. So I said, okay. So I think I went down there and learnt the set the day before we played Glastonbury, and then the next day, that was it. We were on stage at Glastonbury on the second stage. The main thing I remember about that is that my guitar lead wasn't long enough, because I'd never played on a stage that deep. And it got to about the fourth song, and I was supposed to sing some backing vocals. And I marched towards the microphone, and I got about halfway, and my guitar lead went, and I couldn't get any further. And a roadie came on and grabbed my amplifier and ran towards me. I plonked it down by my feet so that I could then walk to the. I got to the microphone just in time to sing the last word.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny. That's funny.
But that was good fun. I enjoyed playing with them. They were good.
Yeah. So that didn't last very long, though.
No, they got. I think they got Simon's brother in to. They needed a permanent person. There was no way I was going to do it permanently. I wanted to get my new band up and running to show everyone that there was more to me than playing guitar in the loft. You know.
Right. Okay. Fast forward to 2006, and the Loft reformed. Who was the driving force behind that?
Well, as I said to you earlier, we hadn't spoken to each other for 25 years. And I think Cherry Red Records came to us and said, this has been John Reed at Cherry Red, who's a fan. And he came to us and said, would you guys be interested in putting together a compilation of stuff? Because the Up the Hill and Down the Slope single was on lots of compilations. It was always being picked up and used. So I sort of said, well, I don't know about that. You know, we don't even talk to each other. So a few emails went around, and we I think Bill and Pete had a brief conversation. Anyway, we all went and met up at Pete's house, and took some bits and pieces, some cassettes and stuff that hadn't been released and what have you. And it was just really nice evening. We opened a couple of bottles of wine and had a chat, and it just, you know, there wasn't any animosity or anything. So we agreed that we would work with Cherry Red to do this compilation. That was the first compilation of what is now 3. And at the end of the night, I can't remember who, it might well have been Dave, said, so if we're going to do this, are we going to play? We're going to get together and play? And nobody went, you having a laugh. We sort of went, well, yeah, we could do, I suppose. So that was it, really.
Yeah.
And then we started playing, and Pete said, well, I've got a couple of new songs that sound really lofty songs. How do you feel about going into the studio and recording them? So we said, yeah, let's do that. So that's what we did. And that's what became the Model Village single.
The Model Village. So do you think over all those years, maybe Pete had some time to think about maybe the rash decision he made and maybe regretted it a little bit?
I think he regretted the way it happened. I don't think he regretted moving on to do something slightly different with the Weather Prophets. And he's explained, he has explained what was going through his head, and he has held his hand up and said that he did it in a really bad way. But it was kind of, in a way, it was sort of down to all of it. I mean, Pete was obviously the one who made the dramatic, bad time decision. But in a way, I think we've all realised that we just weren't really talking to each other about the stuff that was bothering us. We were so busy getting on with, you know, as I said to you earlier, we didn't have anyone helping us. It was just the 4 of us. So we got so tied up in what are we going to do next? What, you know, where are we going to play next? We kind of, I think Pete perhaps needed a little bit of love from the rest of us to sort of say, we do, you know, he was writing all the songs.
Right.
And I think perhaps he felt he wasn't getting the right amount of respect for that he was just being treated like everybody else, where perhaps he wanted to be have a bit of an arm put around him and, you know, coaxed a bit.
Right.
But we didn't have the tools between any of us to sit down and have that conversation, you know. We didn't have Pete always says what we needed was, you know, the Metallica movie where they get the therapist in. That's what we needed. We needed the therapist to come in and talk to us individually and put a plan together, and then we probably could have, you know, the real tragedy of it is a bit of you know, not that it's a tragedy, but the shame is that we didn't make an album, because we could have made a brilliant album around that time. In 1985, we could have made a fantastic album, and we never got the chance to do that.
Mhm. Yeah, well, a band is a family. I mean, whether band members realize it or not, and especially when you spend that much time with each other.
Yeah, it's hard, it's hard being in a band.
Right. I can imagine. I've never been in one, but I can imagine.
Yeah.
Well, let's move on to 2014, the C86 tape celebration. You and Simon Barber playing the Chesterfield tracks at the 92 Club in London. That must have gone down pretty well.
Yeah, it did go down pretty well. Yeah, and Simon was a bit reluctant, because you may know that Davey got killed some years before in a hit and run accident, and Simon was a little bit reluctant to sort of go out and play Chesterfield songs, I think. But I sort of persuaded him that it would be a good thing, and he talked to Davey's family, and they thought it was a great idea. So eventually he sort of thought, okay, well, people want to hear the stuff, so we did that gig, and that went down well, and then we did a few more, and we ended up doing a proper Chesterfields tour in 2019 around the UK, and we played in New York, and that was great. Went down really well, and so here we are now on the verge of a couple of weeks away from this coming out, which is the new Chesterfields album, and another tour around the UK. Yep.
Yeah, you mentioned the New York show and the UK tour. What about the Isle of Wight festival? You played that, right?
Well, no, we didn't, because two of us got COVID.
Oh, you didn't? Okay.
3 days before. So we were all set up to play. The guys were all coming over here, and we got struck with COVID, so we couldn't get together and we couldn't play, so we cancelled. But I'm hoping that we're going to play it next year. They'll keep our slot open for us.
Well, that wasn't you that contracted COVID, was it?
Yeah, I was one of them. Yeah.
Oh.
I wasn't too badly affected, but I was testing positive, so I couldn't have the guys here. And but then we got over that, and we were supposed to, a couple of weeks later, we were supposed to play a festival in Somerset, and Rob, our drummer, got knocked off his bicycle and broke his arm.
Is that right?
Yeah. So we've had a bit of bad luck this summer.
Wow. Did he get hit by a car or what?
No, funnily enough, he got hit by another cyclist.
Oh, okay. Wow, okay.
Who didn't see him and was cycling really fast. One of these guys in the sort of lycra and doing the sort of serious cycling down a hill, and he just took Rob out.
Wow.
But Rob's he's been back drumming for about a month now, building up slowly. So we've got our first gig next Saturday night on the Isle of Wight. So the guys are coming over on Thursday. So he says he's okay now. He reckons he'll be all right for the tour. So fingers crossed. Nobody gets COVID and nobody breaks anything.
Everybody stays healthy till then.
Yeah, and hopefully Helen. I mean, the last tour we did, Helen sliced her finger with a pair of flower cutters. She's got her own flower farm.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was 2 days before the end of the tour, she went to the flower farm for an hour to help her husband, and she sliced through her finger. So for the last 2 gigs, we had to gaffer tape her finger up, and she was bleeding all over the stage, and yeah, very dramatic. But the show must go on.
Well, you guys are accident prone, and yeah, that's that. Well, I hope nobody else gets
me too,
kind of ailment or anything, or any accidents happen.
No.
You fast forwarding to today, you have the 2 new singles out.
Yeah.
Prior to the album, I watched both of the videos on YouTube.
Right.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier about Davey. Our Songbird Has Gone is a tribute to Davey.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, Simon wrote it, and yeah, it's an out-and-out tribute to Dave and the bands that he loved. And that's the big list at the end of the song. Yeah. When some years after Davey died, Davey's wife sent Simon a little notebook, and it had bits of lyrics and little drawings and lists of bands they liked and things from back in the day. And that's basically what the song's about. It's about that notebook and all the things that were in it. So yeah, it's quite a poignant song. Yeah.
Very nice. Yes. Like you said, I really enjoy hearing the name check all the bands.
Yeah, it's gone down well.
Yeah, and I'm like, yeah, I like them. I like them. So I'm going along with them. Yeah, there were bands, most of them that I like too.
Yeah, I've still got to learn the list so that I can sing the backing vocals, but I'm getting there. I've got another week.
Oh yeah, maybe can you have a cheat sheet for you? Like
I'd have to wear glasses there to see it. I don't like to wear. I'm not wearing glasses on stage just yet.
Just yet. Where was that filmed?
The Songbird video.
Yeah.
That was at Helen's flower farm. She's got a silo, an old grain silo, and they use it partly as their office and partly to dry flowers. So it's got all those things that were hung up around.
Right.
Those are dried flowers. So we just set up in there and just played the track, and I thought it looked quite good. Yeah,
I like the atmosphere,
Yeah, it was absolutely freezing cold. We filmed it in early February, I think it was, and it was absolutely freezing.
I was going to say, because she had the gloves with the fingers cut out.
Yeah, I remember thinking at the time, this isn't going to come out until July. This is going to look quite strange. So,
And then Mr. Wilson goes to Norway. Okay. I may know this, and I'm just drawing a blank, but who is Mr. Wilson?
Mr. Wilson, there was an old Chesterfield song from back in the day that was called "Oh, Mr. Wilson," and it was just an imaginary character. But Simon thought it would be quite fun to write a song for this record that was based on one of the characters from the previous record. So it probably would have, the obvious one probably would have been Johnny D, which is a big Chesterfield's hit, and people love that when we play it. Could have written a song about what happened to Johnny D, but instead Simon decided he would write, "This is what happened to Mr. Wilson. He's gone off to Norway," So a nice travel log video as well. I hope you enjoyed the shots of scenic Norway.
Right. Now, who took that footage?
Now James, who did the video, I hope I've got his name right. When he was filming us on the flower farm, we were talking about Mr. Wilson Goes to Norway, and he said, "Oh, I'm going there on holiday in a few weeks." So we said, "Is there any chance you could take your nice camera and just get some really cool scenic shots, and we'll lark about, and could you edit that together?" And he said, "Yeah, I'll do that." So there we go.
Well, it kind of all comes together pretty seamless too,
It does.
The footage of you guys, and then with Norway. So some people could probably say, well, it was all filmed in Norway.
Yeah, I think if I wasn't sitting here going public saying it wasn't, I think we probably should say that it all was definitely filmed in Norway. It's our favourite country. We'd love to come and play there. But I did send it to I sent the link to the guys who put together Indie Fjord, which is a festival over there they do in the summer. So with a bit of luck, they might invite us to come and play. It's a very small festival they do next to a big lake, well, a fjord as they call it over there. They have some pretty cool bands playing, so I think we're hoping that we might get asked if we're allowed to tour in Europe. We want to go and play some gigs in Europe next year if we can work our way through the monstrous paperwork obstacles that have been put in place because of Brexit.
Right.
We're looking to play in Germany and France and a few other places next year.
Right. Yeah, that's all we need is more red tape, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the British government are not very on board when it comes to bands trying to play and just get in a van and go and drive around like we used to. At the moment, you just can't do it.
Like it used to happen, yeah. I like how you're kind of being goofy in the video too, being a little bit be a little bit silly when you're walking, some of your mannerisms and
Yeah, I didn't know what else to do. I look at it now and think, oh God, I'm sure there are people that I know quite well who would think, oh, why are you, can't you try and look cool for once? But I was just a bit bored and cold, and it was me trying to keep warm. It was the same day as the other video, and as I said, it was very cold. So I just thought, just walking down the high street behind Simon, listening to him singing is pretty dull. So It just sort of came out, really. I think the next video, we're doing some more videos and some more filming and stuff. So the next one, I'm going to be as cool as fuck.
Okay.
There will be no messing about.
Okay. That's a promise, huh?
Yeah.
All right, I'll hold you to that one. We'll see.
Yeah.
Okay, so the new album's still coming out on the 23rd?
Yeah, 23rd September, New Modern Homes.
Okay.
Available at all good record shops. It's also coming out on CD, and it's on all the normal digital places where you might go and download stuff and buy it, Bandcamp and all the rest, Spotify. But the vinyl obviously is good, and it's got it's got a lyric sheet and everything in it, and so if people can afford to, I would encourage them to get it on vinyl, because it's a nice thing.
There you go. Well, is that kind of a throwback to the New Modern Homes, right? With the interior designing and the loft and the.
There's no link to the loft. No,
There's
definitely
no
not.
link,
No. The name came. It's mentioned in one of the songs, New Modern Homes. So I just went through the songs and I just wrote down phrases that I thought were vaguely interesting from some of the songs, and then I presented it to Simon and said, here are some interesting things in all of your songs, and that one seemed to work, given that it's a new album. It's it's the Chesterfields being modern. It's not a throwback, hopefully, to back in the 80s. So it sort of worked.
Okay.
But no, definitely no link to the loft or the living room or the basement or anything.
So, and then you've got a tour beginning October 7th through the 15th.
Yeah, well, actually it begins before that, really, because we've got a gig here on the Isle of Wight next week, which is the first one, which is kind of our warm-up gig, I suppose. So we're playing that next Saturday night. And then the weekend after that is the album launch, which we're playing in a record shop in Yeovil at lunchtime. HMV we're playing. And then, before that, the Friday, the 23rd, we're playing in a record shop in Dorchester. Okay. And Saturday lunchtime, we play HMV Yeovil. Saturday evening, we're playing a lovely little theatre in Bridport on the coast in Dorset. And then the following week, the tour, as you said, starts sort of proper in London. And that lasts a couple of weeks.
Well, with Brexit, the stringent requirements and that kind of thing, do you see yourself ever touring the States?
I would love to. I mean, I've had a little taste of it. I've played in New York a few times, and it's been really great, and really I was quite surprised that people, a fairly young audience, sort of knew the songs. And I played there with the Loft in 2015. We headlined the New York Pop Fest, and people were really, really cool and really appreciative. And then we went the next year. We went with the Chesterfields, and the same thing happened. All the gigs were sold out, and so it would be lovely. And we have been asked by a few individuals said, come over to the West Coast, come and do this, that, and the other. But to do it is a huge commitment, and working out the finances and it's I'm not sure any promoter would want to pay us enough to make it worthwhile, not worthwhile, but make it that it didn't cost us a huge amount of money to do it. But you never know. It might. If the record does well and people are keen, it would be lovely. It would be lovely to do it. Yeah. We've got a similar situation with thinking of, we'd quite like to go and play in Japan, because the Chesterfields had quite a good following in Japan. But again, it's really about whether we can, we kind of need to set these tours out like a lot of bands like us. If you can set the tour up so that you don't lose too much money and you treat it as a bit of a holiday with some gigs thrown in, then it's, you know, it's good fun, and it's great to meet people, get out and about and meet people. And I'm always surprised when people come up and say, you know, oh, I've loved this for ages, and, you know, really good that you did that song. And I'm always quite taken aback by it. So it's a really good thing to do.
Yeah.
So if we can all stay at your house, Greg,
there,
you know,
there you go. There you go.
Pete's been playing these house shows where you just, you know, you go, somebody's got a big house and you just play in their living room, and
that's what this is. That's what this is.
Yeah.
So I guess maybe more people that hear about that and might continue to grow.
Yeah, that would be good.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you want to mention real quickly, are you still working as a National Health Service communicator?
Yeah. I'm sort of semi-retired, so I do that a couple of days a week when they need me. So yeah, yesterday I was writing messages about the death of the Queen for the NHS staff. So
okay, yeah, we didn't talk. Yeah. What's the mood there, generally speaking?
I think I find it fascinating. There's, you know, she was an old lady, and not surprisingly, at the age of 96, she's died. You know, that happens. Most old ladies don't get to 96. So, you know, for her family and her friends, that's a real shame. Most British people, I would say, and I don't like speaking on behalf of other people, but kind of think, oh, it's a shame, but it was inevitable. And, you know, but there's a sort of national narrative that gets built up that is, you know, it's absolutely terrible. Everyone loved her. Everyone's in the streets crying and tearing their hair out, and, you know, so it's it's interesting to watch that side of things ramping up, because we're in 10 days of official mourning and all this sort of stuff, which doesn't, you know, it seems quite an old-fashioned response.
Yeah. Well, that's speaking from an American, not, you know, living there. I think, yeah, I agree.
So it's interesting how the old guard, you know, the tradition sort of kicks in when things like this happen, and the Brits go along with it. Although most of them are just going about their normal lives and their daily lives as they would have done, you know.
Right. Well, I was surprised that you know, wanted to continue to do this interview. I thought you'd be in mourning yourself.
No, I'm not a royalist.
Right.
I don't.
Right.
You know, we mentioned my 89-year-old mother earlier, and I was talking to her today, and because she hadn't said much about it, and I was quite surprised, because her generation, you know, they grew up with the Queen, and
right.
And I said, so what do you think about it? And she said, oh, well, you know, I'm sure it'd be good. I said, I thought you weren't a big fan of Charles and Camilla. And she said, well, that was, you know, I didn't like the way they treated Diana. So there's definitely that thing about everybody supposedly loved Princess Diana, you know.
Right.
And wasn't it terrible that, you know, the way she was treated, which from what I know, it probably was, but, you know, it's not a great interest of mine.
Well, it is interesting how generations there have never known a king. You know, what night was it? 1952, was it?
Yeah. So I've never, you know, she was the Queen she's been the Queen for my entire life.
Right.
I'm intrigued to see when they get around to doing the new stamps and the money and the coins and the notes. You know, that'll be interesting.
That will be interesting. Yeah.
I've heard today that the tradition is that when you get a new monarch, they have to face the opposite way on the money.
Oh, okay.
So they alternate. So every time a new monarch comes in, they turn they face the opposite way to the old monarch.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
So
that would be interesting.
Yeah. Well, that's something too. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of new things coming about.
Yeah. So there's the Queen, God bless her.
Right.
So Charles will be that way, you know. Charles will be facing that way.
That way. Exactly.
So he'll be looking out of the note rather than across the note.
And then across the note. One other thing I thought about, and did the Queen and her husband was way up there too. He was 90.
He was in his 90s. Yeah.
So did they ever write a book about longevity? about.
No, I think it's called privilege and having the best private health service possibly in the world to keep you going, you know.
Right. The Queen's diet, you know, I could see.
Yeah, the determinants of health. She wasn't brought up on unhealthy food, and she didn't drink and smoke too much, and she didn't take too many drugs, and you know, she did well.
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure.
God bless her.
Yeah, that's something else. Anyway, lots to think about there, and lots of I guess you guys. When do you think that life will get back to normal after the mourning? How long?
Well, I think from what I've seen today, they reckon that the funeral will probably be a week tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
No, a week on Monday. Mm-hmm. So I think in theory, the day after the funeral, things are supposed to get back to normal. But then, of course, we've got the coronation of the king. Okay. So that will be a public holiday, right. And that will be a throwback to, well, I imagine it will be exactly the way it was when the Queen was crowned in 19. So it'll all be, you know, wow. The Archbishop and the crown and all the pomp and ceremony, because obviously that's the thing that the Brits love. Oh yeah, well, we tend to like that too. So I mean, everybody's fixated on the TV here. Oh yeah, you know, the last few days, you know, couple of days. Anyway, yeah, oh yeah. There's been some funny things. I shared it on Facebook actually. Because they've got 24-hour news and they're not allowed to report about anything else really at the moment. Mm-hmm. The BBC in particular, it's just 24 hours about the Queen and the King. They had a woman reporter outside Buckingham Palace at 3 o'clock in the morning interviewing people, and of course a lot of the people there were just pissed and, you know, were wandering around. And she, have a look on my Facebook page, she ended up interviewing this drunk Swedish woman who had brought along a Lego model of Princess Leia as a tribute to the Queen. And the woman, so this woman starts interviewing her, and then you can see her thinking, oh my God, I've got a right nutcase here. And it's all live telly, you know. So, yeah, very funny. I will check that out. I will check that out. All right, well, I guess that kind of come to a close here. Okay, cool. Oh, family, you want to talk about real quick, if you'd like to? Family. Mm-hmm. Your family. Well, as in, I've got 2 sons, mm-hmm. Grown-up sons, stepdaughter and a stepson. Mm-hmm. And my stepson and his wife are expecting their first child at Christmas, so I guess I'll be a step granddad. Oh, okay. Wow. Christmas time. Christmas baby. Yeah. My sons both play music, not professionally, but my younger son taught himself to play the piano, and my older son plays guitar. Yeah, they're pretty cool. One's a teacher and one runs a digital theatre company. Mm-hmm. So he's been at the Edinburgh Festival for the last month. Okay. Yeah, they're good. They're good guys, and they really like their music. So yeah, I'll be seeing them. We're playing in London, so I'll see the younger one in London, and the older one's in Nottingham. We're playing there a week later, so I'll be able to catch up with them. It'll be good fun. Good. Well, it's in the blood, I'm sure. Yeah, they all like Thin Lizzy, so I think I passed that on. Yeah, I tend to listen to them from time to time. Okay, and then you have the one cat. Any other pets? Just the one cat, Moses. He's we live here. We're quite near the sea, and we're surrounded by woods, and then it's the sea. Okay. And he's got a very wide range. He can go for miles, and he's an expert killer of vermin. So most days he brings us a present. I was gonna ask that. Yeah. Oh, that's nice. He's gone to sleep on a rocking chair now after his dinner. So he thanks you for letting him fill himself up and have a sleep. Oh, that's nice. Okay. All right. Well, cool. Thank you, Andy. Anything to add? That was all good. Thank you for having me. I think so. Well, it was good. Yeah. It was nice being had, right? Yeah, absolutely. That's what I say. Nice. I'm going to go back to practicing now. Okay. I've got one of my guitars set up, and I've got to get because the Chesterfields are arriving on Thursday, so I need to be absolutely on it by then.
Okay.
So, fortunately, in this house, I can make as much noise as I like.
Hey, there you go. There you go. You know, too bad you weren't a drummer. Then you could really just rock out.
Well, in this room. So we're going to set the band up in this room on Thursday and Friday, and just go for it. So.
Great, great. All right. Well, best of luck to you.
Cheers.
On the the release of the album and the
thanks.
tour and after that. So hope everything goes well for you. And
thank you very much.
Sure. And thanks again for visiting with us today, Andy.
Cool. Thank you, Greg. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, it's nice to meet you. Appreciate your time.
Okay, mate. See you later.
All righty.